Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's business studies lesson. My name is Tsiri Sotlaka, and this lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saipono Discovery Center. Even today, we look into the impact of recent legislation. This is covered in your paper 1, and this will be assessed under question 2, question 4, and question 5 of your paper 1. So we'll be looking into the last 2 acts, which are your consumer laws. This will be your National Credit Act and your Consumer Protection Act. Now, our learning outcomes. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the purpose of National Credit Act. You should further be able to discuss the impact of National Credit Act and suggest ways in which businesses can comply with the National Credit Act, and also explain actions regarded as non-compliance by the National Credit Act and discuss penalties or consequences for non-compliance. Then also recommend consumer rights according to the National Credit Act. We are also going to look into the Consumer Protection Act, and we also look into the following: the purpose of the Consumer Protection Act, and look into the impact of the Consumer Protection Act to say if a business implements this act, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages. And then we also suggest ways in which the business can comply with the consumer protection. So we will look into how the business can follow rules or follow this law, and also look into explaining actions that are regarded as non-compliance to say the business, these actions should not be done because they will consider the business, or the government will consider the business to be non-complying if it performs certain actions according to the Consumer Protection Act. And then we'll also discuss the penalties for non-compliance to say what punishment can the business face if they fail to comply with these legislations. Now, we'll also look into recommending consumer rights according to Consumer Protection Act. We should understand by the end of this lesson that the consumer rights according to or in terms of National Credit Act will not be similar to consumer rights according or in terms of Consumer Protection Act. Those two are different because one act talks about protecting workers, it talks about protecting consumers rather, about in the process of buying goods or on credit. But when you look into consumer protection, it protects all consumers who engage in buying whether on cash or on credit. Then pre-knowledge, this is what we've covered so far. We looked into the following legislations. We looked into skills development. We also looked into labor relations. Then we also looked into the Employment Equity Act. Then we looked into the Basic Conditions of Employment Act together with the provisions of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Then we looked into the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment. Remember, this is a lesson where we also looked into the pillars of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act to say we have 5 pillars. And then we also looked into Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Disease Act. Terminology that is key for this lesson is the term compliance, because the focus area of these legislations being developed is for businesses to comply. So what do we mean by the term compliance? What do we mean by the term comply? This refers to acting according to a set of rules. So when a business is acting according to the guideline of each act, they are then complying. Hence, the businesses are given guideline on how to comply with each act. And complying with each act will be different because each act focuses on a different matter. Therefore, it's important for a business to comply so that they do not face penalties. What are we talking about when we are talking to penalties? Penalties refers to punishment for doing something that is against the law. To say, if the business is not complying, what is the punishment for that particular business? This can include a compliance order being issued by the labor court to enforce the business to comply with each act, and some businesses might be fined for non-compliance. So we will look into all those. Now, remember, we have the following legislations. We have 8, but now we're going to look into the last 2. These are your National Credit Act and your Consumer Protection. And I consider these 2 to be your consumer laws because they protect consumers who engage in trying to buy goods and services. And National Credit Act focuses on the idea of consumers who buy on credit to say they should also be protected. National Credit Act. What do we mean by this act? This act was introduced. What is key? The introduction was done by the government. So this act was introduced by the government to protect consumers against unfair and reckless credit granting by businesses. Because what would happen is that consumers used to be given credit even if they don't afford. Yes, they qualify, but they did not afford. So what is key is for a consumer to afford and also to qualify. So businesses would exploit the opportunity and take advantage of the idea that this consumer qualifies even though the consumer didn't afford to have opportunity to take that particular credit. So that's why this act was introduced, to ensure that proper standards or proper guidance is provided to businesses on who should be given credit and who should not be given credit. So that is why this act was introduced, to check for credit applications in the process of granting credit to consumers, to say the right consumers should be given their credit and the credit should be limited to what they afford. Now let us look into consumer protection. Why was it introduced? The main aim of this act is to protect the economic interest of consumers by providing them with information so that they can make informed decisions. So the aim is to protect consumers so that they make informed decisions. So basically this is the government developing the Consumer Protection Act to protect the consumers who engage in buying products or who engage in trading or buying any service they're looking for. So the information should serve as a key information to make economically best decisions for each and every consumer. Hence it talks about providing the consumers with information so that they make the best decision in terms of buying their goods and services. Now, National Credit Act, Consumer Protection Act, we're going to look into the following. We're going to look into the purpose, the impact, and then we'll look into non-compliance according to each, and look into penalties for non-compliance together with ways to comply with each of the acts. Then we look into the consumer rights according to National Credit Act and consumer rights according to Consumer Protection Act. Let's start with the purpose. Why was this act developed? And as you can see, the National Credit Act is Act number 34 of 2005, whereas the Consumer Protection Act is Act number 68 of 2008. Let's see what was the government thinking about, or what was the main objective of developing this act. For National Credit Act, the aim there was to promote the responsible granting of credit by credit providers. So the act was developed to ensure that businesses become responsible before they give out credit to the consumers. Hence it says responsible granting of credit by credit providers, to say businesses, you are the ones who provide credit. Therefore, the credit should be given to consumers who qualify. And why was it developed again? To ensure that credit is equally available to all qualifying consumers. To say there were some consumers who were not given credit, maybe because of their racial background, maybe because of their gender, maybe because of their age. So all qualifying consumers have to qualify, especially when they qualify, they should be given an opportunity equally to apply for any credit. And then this act was also introduced to ensure that consumers of credit are well informed about details included in their credit contracts, so that consumers don't just sign they read through their credit contracts so that they understand what they are signing for, because that information is important for a consumer who's buying goods on credit, because in the past consumers would just sign with lack of knowledge. So this act ensures that businesses, before they grant credit, they make consumers to go through the contract and initial in each page to show that they went through each of the pages. Then when you look into Consumer Protection Act, why was it developed? This act was developed to promote fair and accessible and sustainable places for producers to sell their product. So this act doesn't focus only to consumers, but it also creates a sustainable environment where businesses could sell their product, because it protects businesses from engaging maybe in unfair competition. So that is why it was developed. And it also provides guidelines for a better consumer information, and it prohibits unfair business practices. When one business does unfair business practices, that can be considered to be now unfair to the other business and also unfair to the consumer. So hence it provides guidelines to ensure that there's better consumer information, and it prohibits unfair business practices. Furthermore, it establishes national standards to protect consumers regardless of their social or economic status. So that is why this act was developed. Now let us look into the impact. The impact of the two acts. We will start by looking into the advantages. And remember, the advantages will always benefit the consumer in this regard, and they will also benefit the business. How so? The advantage for complying with National Credit Act is that the National Credit Act, NCA, protects businesses against non-paying customers. So the guideline will help businesses to ensure that they only give credit to customers who qualify. Those who don't qualify will not get the credit. Therefore, the business shall have what? Avoided non-paying customers. So that is the advantage. It means more money will come in because only qualifying customers will get the credit. Another advantage is the correct implementation of the National Credit Act leads to more customers through credit sales, as they now know that they are protected from abuse and exploitation. The idea that consumers know that they are protected and they will not be exploited, they will not be made to sign contracts they don't understand, it makes the consumers now to what? To go and apply for more credit, which is an advantage still for the business, and also an advantage when it comes to the customer, because the customer knows that they will not be exploited or abused. So it is a win-win for both the business and the consumers. Then when you look into another advantage with regards to National Credit Act is that businesses that are authorized credit providers may attract more consumers, meaning there'll be more consumers because one, they'll have consumers who buy on cash, and also they'll have more consumers who want to buy on credit. So that will attract more and more customers for the business, meaning sales will go up and more products will be then out of the business, which is good for the business because it means more profit for the business. So those are the advantages of a business that complies with the National Credit Act. Now, when you look into the advantages of the Consumer Protection Act, to say when the business complies with this act, what are the advantages? Businesses may gain increased customer loyalty. Why would customers be loyal? They would be loyal because this business is providing information so that customers make informed decisions before they buy their goods or services. Therefore, they will gain customer loyalty and improved profitability because of compliance with the Consumer Protection Act. There won't be unfair advertising. Consumers will be given their right to choose. So this would then allow consumers to be loyal to that particular business. And then it safeguards businesses from dishonest competitors, dishonest competitors who might be trying to mislead consumers so that they come to their business. And that would then not happen, because should they do any unfair advertising, that will lead toward now non-compliance according to the Consumer Protection Act. So it safeguards the market where sellers sell their product, especially if they are in the same industry, meaning selling the same product. So that would safeguard the sellers of the product. It protects the business if they are regarded as consumers. It will also protect consumers, or it will also protect the business, because the business somehow they need to go and buy their raw material. They need to go to buy their stock. So they are then considered to be consumers in that point, because when a particular business is going to stock a product, wherever they stock, they consider, or the supplier considers, that particular business to be consumers. So in the process of that issue, their consumers or the business will be protected as well. So that is another advantage. But when we look into the negatives, you would realize that this sentence is there for all the acts. So the implementation of the National Credit Act, it is time consuming, it's expensive, it's prescriptive, and administratively burdensome, especially the complex and expensive debt collection procedures. So the process of collecting debt, because the guideline that is given here with regards to also the issue of credit and how to collect the debts that maybe one of their customers is having is time consuming. So that becomes a negative to say, should a consumer now owe you, or should one of your debtors not pay on time, you cannot do some of the actions that will fast track the process of collecting the debt. So that becomes now a disadvantage for the business, because anything that wastes time, that wastes money, is considered to be a disadvantage for the business. And then failing to comply with the National Credit Act may result in legal action being faced by the business. Because here we are talking about business and the consumer. So legal implications would then be serious, meaning the punishment is going to be serious, because then the business is taking advantage of consumers. So this would be the negative. When you look into negatives, according to the Consumer Protection Act, is that the disadvantage is that the implementation as well of the Consumer Protection Act is time consuming, it's expensive, and prescriptive and administratively burdensome, meaning it will take time and it will be expensive to comply, especially the implementation of processes and procedures that are required by the Consumer Protection Act in terms of advertising, in terms of being responsible for the stock, and so many other issues that are considered in the process of trading with the consumers. So when we look into another disadvantage, is that consumers can take advantage of the businesses and return goods when it's not necessary to do so, because there will be consumer rights that protect consumers and allow consumers to do so. To say consumers would then have under the right to choose, they will be having now the power to return goods unnecessarily so, which will then affect the business, because they will then take advantage of the consumer rights. This is what the consumers can do, and this will be a negative for a business. Then actions regarded as non-compliance according to these two acts, for instance, refusing, or when a business that provides or sells goods on credit refuses or refusing to grant a consumer credit based on any form of discrimination, such as race, gender, age, religion, language, culture, or sexual orientation. This is considered to be non-compliance, because it's basically a discrimination taking place there. And then granting credit recklessly to consumers and failing to explain credit contracts to consumers is considered to be non-compliance. One, only customers or consumers that qualify for credit should be granted credit. That's number one. And the second aspect of the sentence says, failing to explain the credit contract to consumers will lead to non-compliance, because the consumers should sign a credit agreement that they understand, nothing else. Then, blacklisting customers without exhausting all efforts to recover the debt from the consumer is considered to be non-compliance. Should a consumer skip 1 month, it doesn't necessarily mean the business should then jump to blacklisting. The business still has to try to recover the amount that was not paid using different ways, maybe using a method like a payment arrangement or other means to try to collect whatever debt. So the blacklisting is the last resort. It cannot be taken as the first strategy to deal with collecting any outstanding debts. When you look into actions regarded as non-compliance, according to consumer protection, there we focus on the issue that treating customers unfairly based on any form of discrimination, such as race, gender, age, religion, language, culture, or disability, or sexual orientation inside a business when they are trying to buy, it is considered to be what now? That is considered to be non-compliant. And then charging different and unfair prices to consumers for the same goods and services is considered to be non-compliant by that particular business. And then denying or refusing customers proper information about the goods and service is also considered to be non-compliant, because the information will help the consumer to make informed decision on what they are buying and the features. Therefore, they are talking about the features to say, specify what features are there so that the consumer can then decide to say, based on these features, this is what I need. But based on these features, they will then also make an informed decision to say, no, these features are too much. This is not what I need. What I need is a product that can perform action 1, 2, 3. So give that information so that the consumer can make an informed decision. So those are actions regarded as non-compliance according to the Consumer Protection Act. What is the penalty for non-compliance with these two acts? The business that doesn't comply with National Credit Act may be revoked for reckless granting of credit and gross violation of contravening with the National Credit Act, because the National Credit Act says businesses should not grant credit to consumers who do not qualify and who do not afford. So that can be now the punishment. The license can be taken, revoked, which can mean now the business will have to stop because they do not have the license to operate that particular business. Then another non-compliance or penalty could be the National Credit Regulator may impose a fine or a penalty on a business for non-compliance. Meaning now, this is a penalty or a fine to say they might have to pay a certain amount for failing to comply with the National Credit Act, because the national regulator is the overseer of how credit is given in the market. Then, the court may declare the granting of credit by businesses as reckless and may order consumers not to repay the credit. This is very interesting. To say now, the court may declare or decide that the granting of credit by the business was reckless. So this is to say, the court will say, consumer A was given credit by the business, even when consumer A did not afford and qualify for that particular credit. So because the business provided or gave a consumer that didn't qualify for credit a credit, then the court may say this consumer should not pay this credit because the business didn't follow the correct procedures before they granted credit. So this becomes the punishment to the business to say they gave away their product. It will look like they gave away their product for free because the consumer was not properly checked if they qualify or they do not qualify. That's what the point is emphasizing or is saying, to say the court may declare the granting of credit by the business as reckless and may order the consumers not to repay the credit or part thereof to the business, which will then be an advantage to that particular consumer. Then penalties for non-compliance with the Consumer Protection Act, license of the business may be revoked for unfair consumer practices, such as selling second-hand products as a new product. That can mean that the product will be, or the license will be, revoked. Businesses that do not comply may receive a compliance order, which forces the business to comply with the Consumer Protection Act. Then a business may be requested by the National Credit Commissioner to suspend activities indefinitely. So this can mean now the business will then ordered to stop. Then, ways to comply. How will the business comply with these two acts? Register the business with the National Credit Regulator so that the regulator can control and give guidance on how credit should be provided or given. Furthermore, submit annual compliance reports to the National Credit Regulator. The annual compliance report basically is a report that will be explaining how credit was being given during the financial year of a business. So this would then give the National Credit Regulator an idea to say, is this business giving credit to customers who qualify or not? Then they should also conduct affordability assessments to ensure that consumers can meet their obligations. So these affordability assessments, it becomes a key way to say before credit can be given, the business should assess, check, evaluate if this consumer is going to be able to pay their debt, or pay for what they borrow, or pay for whatever product they buy on credit before the product or the loan is given to the customer. So they should do what we call affordability assessments. This is done to check if the customer can afford. Then, ways to comply with consumer protection. Allow consumers a 5-day cool-off period in the sale agreement. After a consumer has bought a product, allow that consumer a 5-day cool-off period. Disclose the prices of all products that are on sale. All products that are being sold, they should be displayed for consumers to have and enjoy their right, which is the right to choose. Not only products that are expensive should be displayed, but everything that is being sold, everything that is on sale should be displayed. And then conduct training with all staff members and stakeholders on Consumer Protection Act, because what is key here is that the staff members are the ones who are going to engage with the customer. So they need to know how to comply with the Consumer Protection Act. They need to know what are the consumer rights so that they are in a better position to deal with any challenge or any error or any misconception with the consumer in the right way, because they will then protect the business and also respect the consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection Act. Then, let's look into the different consumer rights. We'll start by looking into consumer rights in terms of National Credit Act. Remember, these consumer rights will then protect the consumer in the process of buying goods on credit. Number one, the first consumer right is that the consumer has a right to apply for credit and to be free from discrimination. That's number one. Every consumer has a right to apply for credit. Number two, consumers have a right to receive information in plain and understandable language so that they know what they are signing for, so that they know what they will be paying for, because they will be taking a credit. So the language that is in the contract should be plain and understandable by the consumer. Then, consumers have a right to receive documents as required by the Act. They have a right to receive documents which can include their credit, for instance, contract. They need to have a copy so that they know, so that should there be changes, they can then check to say, but according to the agreement, according to the credit contract, I'm supposed to pay 200 per month. So now, why am I paying 300? So the contract should be with them. Then, consumers have the right to receive a pre-agreement documentation before concluding any credit transaction. A pre-agreement is some sort of quotation that will give a consumer an idea of what they could potentially pay for the credit they are applying for. So they need to have that document just to go and think and decide if they really want to purchase whatever asset on credit or whatever product on credit. And then consumers also have the right to obtain reasons for credit being refused. To say, yes, I applied for credit, but I want to know why was it refused. So consumers have a right as well to get that particular reason. As we proceed, consumers would also have a right to fair and responsible marketing in regards the process of buying on credit, and also they will also have now the right to access and challenge credit records or information, to say whatever credit record, whatever credit score that is revealing here is not their actual credit score. So they can challenge the credit records that are being presented, or the whatever information the business will receive about that particular customer. Then when we look into the consumer rights according to the consumer protection, we will look into the following. We will look into the consumer right according to consumer protection, which will include the right to choose, the right to equality in the consumer market, the right to fair and honest dealings, the right to disclosure and information, the right to fair and responsible marketing, and also we look into the accountability by the supplier, and also look into fair or just reasonable terms and conditions, and also look into the right to fair value or good quality and safety. So those are the consumer rights according to the consumer protection, and we will also have the right to privacy by the consumer. So you should then know the following: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 consumer rights, and be in a position to identify them from the scenario, be in a position to identify them from a statement, and lastly, be in a position to explain these consumer rights. Should they be assessed in an SMA? Then, the right to choose. What do we mean by that? Consumers have a right to choose their suppliers or goods that they want to buy. They have a right to do so. Consumers have a right to shop around for the best price. And also consumers have a right to do what? To return goods that are unsafe or defective for a full refund. And then they also have a right to reject goods that are not of the same quality as sampled in the marketed product. So in the process of advertising the product, in the promotional gifts, the product will then be different. So in this case, they have a right to reject goods that are not the same as the sample marketed, because sometimes they give you a free product to say go and try our product, but then when you buy the actual product, now the actual product is not similar to what was advertised or what was given to you as a sort of promotion. So that is considered to be now under your right to choose. You will then have to reject such a product because it is not similar to what was sampled when the product was being marketed. So a consumer has a right to choose to say either buy in shop A, they have a right to either buy in shop B or stall C. As you can see, they have a right to shop around for the best price. So they can compare 1, 2, or 3. Then the right to privacy and confidentiality. Consumers have a right to what? To stop or restrict unwanted direct marketing. So this would normally happen when a consumer maybe is getting a direct call, and in that direct call they are trying to sell a particular product. Consumers have a right to stop that from happening because this is direct marketing. Then they can object unwanted promotional emails. So when they buy a product somewhere, they can require for their email. And in the process of now typing or giving the email to that particular business, the consumers have a right to say, I will not love to receive any emails about your promotions or whatever you are selling. So consumers have a right to do so because this is their right to what? Privacy. Then this will protect them from receiving any emails around what? The promotion, around what? The business is selling as well, or any direct call trying to sell to those particular consumers. Consumers have a right to fair and honest dealings. For instance, this means that the consumer, for instance, can then make sure that they don't face this. Suppliers may not use physical force or harass a particular consumer. Hence, we say they have to be fair and honest when they are dealing with particular consumers. This will protect the consumers. And then another one is that suppliers may not give misleading or false information when dealing with what? Consumers. Because should a supplier give a misleading or false information, they are not being honest, they are not being fair in the process of selling their product. Hence, they have to be honest when they are selling a product, honest about the features, honest about the ingredients, and honest about the benefits of a particular product. Then, the right to disclosure and information. Contracts and agreements should be in plain language and easy to understand language. Should there be any contract, the information on the contract should be clear. So this is about now disclosure. Then when you look into information again, it can say the business should display prices which are fully inclusive and disclosing all the cost. Disclosure of everything, inclusive of everything. That should be clear to say this excludes what, this includes what. Then, as we proceed, businesses should label products and trade descriptions correctly according to the information that is there. So the contracts have to be clear, and the information about the product should be clear, and the brands should be clearly indicated. The labels of the products should be clearly indicated as well. The right to fair and responsible marketing. Businesses should not mislead consumers on pricing, benefits, or uses of a what? Good, to say they are trying to now encourage them to buy very fast because they are talking about features that are not there. Businesses should not mislead those particular consumers, especially on the pricing, on the benefits, and the uses. To say, do not convince consumers to say a particular product can perform certain actions when the business know that those features are not there. So they should not do so. Then, consumers may cancel purchases made through direct marketing within 5 working days or within the cool-off period. So if they buy goods directly, they can then decide to say they are no longer happy with the product, therefore they can return it back so that they cancel whatever purchase they were trying to make. Then the right to accountability by the supplier. Consumers have a right to be protected in a lay-by agreement. So consumers have a right to be protected in a lay-by, and this will then be the accountability of the supplier. Why? Because the product in a lay-by process will be with the supplier or will be with the business that the consumer is trying to buy to. So it becomes the accountability of the supplier to make sure that the product is safe. Hence, we say consumers have a right to be protected in a lay-by agreement. Then, businesses should honor credit vouchers and prepaid services that are being provided by maybe consumers. So they should be honored so that the supplier becomes accountable for and agree with such. Then this will then mean the supplier is accountable because they will make sure that they protect consumers in a lay-by agreement, and whatever product that they have lay-by should come with the right quality, and it should not be utilized because it's in a lay-by process. Then the right to fair or just and reasonable terms and conditions. This then focuses on the idea that the business should not provide consumers with a written notice of clauses, or the business should provide consumers with written notices of clauses that may limit consumer rights. There's some products that would then the business would say you cannot return this product. Those clauses have to be clear when a consumer is buying a product. This will show fairness and this will show reasonable terms and conditions to say when the product was being bought, the business was very clear to say you may not return this product. So you have a choice before you buy to say, do you buy the product or not? Because you are buying the product knowing very well that you will not be allowed as a consumer to return the product. Therefore, it becomes a fair deal if the business does what? Provides the consumers with the written notices of clauses that may limit those consumer rights. Furthermore, businesses may not market or sell goods at an unfair price. That will not be fair, that will not be reasonable in terms of selling to the consumer. Then they should not do that. And then with the contract as well, the clauses should be clear to say when you are buying this product, you may not return it. So it should be clear. Then the rise to equality in the consumer market. Businesses should not limit access to goods and services. And then another one is that businesses may not vary the quality of their products to different consumers. To say when they sell to particular customers, other customers would then receive this. But then in reality, other customers would receive this. So you see there is a varying of quality there. You can see that there's no tomato here, but there's a tomato here. You can see that the cheese here looks very, 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 very unhealthy, but the cheese here, it shows that it was well prepared and on time. So the quality should not be same. The quality should be the same for all consumers. Then businesses should not discriminate when marketing their products and services in different areas or places. Then we look into our activity for today's lesson. The first instruction is to outline the consumer rights according to the National Credit Act. And then number 2 instructs us to read the scenario below and answer questions that follow. This is your scenario. Then you're having the first question that says 2.1, identify the act applicable to the scenario above. Then motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. Then 2.2 says explain the impact of the act identified in question 2.1. So let us look into this. I will give you 5 minutes. You try to answer and then we come back with solutions to say how do you go about answering such a direct and an indirect question. So this becomes your direct and then this one will be your indirect. It is indirect because the question is dependent on the what? On the scenario. So let's see how you'll answer this one. Let me give you 5 minutes, then I'll come back and provide you with your solutions on this matter. Thank you. Welcome back. I believe I provided you with enough time. Now, let us look into the first question again. It's clear. Outline the consumer rights according to the National Credit Act. Then you're expected to outline there. Then 2, read the scenario below and answer questions that follow. The scenario is based on Pablo Enterprise, PE. Pablo Enterprise sells furniture items. They disclose prices of all products on sale. Moreover, they conduct credit affordability assessments to check if consumers meet their obligation. Now, identify the act applicable to the scenario and motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. Then 2.2, explain the impact of the act identified in 2.1. Now, the consumer rights, by now you should know that 1, consumers have a right to apply for credit. That's one. They have a right to apply for credit and to be free from the discrimination. And then they have a right to receive information in a plain and understandable language. Furthermore, they have a right to receive documents as required by the Act. And they also have the right to receive a pre-agreement documentation before concluding on any credit purchase or transaction. They also have a right to obtain reasons for credit being refused, to say why was the credit not granted. Provide reasons. Then they also have a right to fair and responsible marketing, to say now as part of advertising, the process should be fair and attract candidates in a way that only candidates who want to buy on credit will also be granted the opportunity, and it should not change when that particular customer goes to the business to try and buy on credit. And then access and challenge. They also have access and the ability to challenge any credit records or information about their credit. Then when you look into this one, you'll realize that there are 2 acts here that are applicable, to say the act that says disclose all prices of goods on sale, and moreover they conduct credit affordability assessments to check if consumers meet the obligation. Then this would make 2 acts to be applicable there. Then when you look into them, we know that we have National Credit Act and we also have Consumer Protection Act. So with those now give you a guideline to say consumer protection. When we look into it, it will talk about the disclosing of information. But when you are looking into the National Credit Act, it will focus on what? The credit affordability being conducted. But let us look now into the impact. What are the positives for your National Credit Act? Low bad debts resulting in better cash flow. It means now there will be low bad debts resulting in better cash flow for the business that is selling on credit. That's one. It protects the business against non-paying consumers. And then another one is that authorized credit providers may attract more consumers, and then it leads to more customers through credit sales, as they are now protected by the abuse or from the abuse of buying on credit. What are the negatives? Businesses can no longer carry out credit marketing. And another one is that businesses struggle to get credit, such as bank loans or overdrafts. And then the business that do not comply with the National Credit Act may face legal action. Then with consumer protection, the positives are the business may be safeguarded from dishonest competitors who might exploit the market, and the business may be protected if they are regarded as consumers when they are going to buy. Then this will prevent larger businesses from undermining small ones, and the business will actually gain loyalty, and this is because they would be complying with the Consumer Protection Act. However, the negatives are the idea that the confidential business information may become available to competitors, and penalties for non-compliance may be very high with this act because it talks to the consumer. So somehow, if the consumer is really affected by the product, that could lead to non-compliance. And then businesses may feel unnecessarily burdened by the legal process. Then we have another type of assessment whereby you are required to identify the consumer rights that are implemented by Kailio Limited in each statement below. So this is also an indirect question. You will read the statement. After reading the statement, you then identify the consumer right that is applicable there. And this is the consumer right in terms of consumer protection. So the salesperson allows consumers to shop around for the best price. What is the answer there? You have to think about it. And then 3.2, management does not share personal information of their employees with clients, and then customers are charged the same price for the goods of the same quality or of the same service. So think about this. You should know your consumer rights. The first thing you should do is to try to name your consumer rights. Name them first, then look into what now, explaining them after, to say with a so consumer right, the focus of this consumer right is to do so for a consumer. So that will help you then to be in a better position to identify these consumer rights from either a statement or a scenario. So when we look into the solution here, you will then understand that the following: the salesperson allowing customers to shop around for the best price. This should be the right to choose. Then the manager does not share personal information with employees or with clients. Now this is the right to privacy. Then customers are charged the same price, or they are not charged for the same price. Same price of what? Goods or services in the different areas. So this is the consumer right to equality in the marketplace. Equality in the marketplace. Now, so this is your equality in the marketplace. Now, when you look into that, you are then in a better position to identify. And you should remember that for you, you should write the right to choose, the right to privacy. Write them in full so that you don't confuse whoever will be marking your script in your final exam. And then we will be looking into essays to say how should you go about writing an essay, because that becomes very key. It's a focal point, especially regarding the idea that an essay will be marked differently as compared to your section B. So here you will then achieve your 6 marks. Let us look into the summary of our lesson. We addressed the following: the National Credit Act and the Consumer Protection Act. This is what we addressed. And then we also looked into the following: the purpose of each, the impact, the non-compliance, together with penalties for non-compliance for your National Credit Act and for your Consumer Protection Act. We also looked into ways to comply with each of this act and looked into the consumer right according to the National Credit Act. With the Consumer Protection Act, we did the same. We looked into the purpose, we looked into the impact, we also looked into non-compliance together with penalties for non-compliance and ways to comply together with consumer rights. Then we looked into the consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection or consumer rights as stipulated by the Consumer Protection Act, whereby we look to the right to privacy, which was there in the scenario, the right to choose, and also the right to equality in the consumer market, the right to fair and honest dealings, the right to disclosure and information, the right to fair and responsible marketing, and the right to accountability by the supplier, together with the right to fair and reasonable terms and conditions, together with the right to fair value and good quality, together with safety. So those were your consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection Act. So with that being said, this then will be the end of our lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to look into the human resource. So with the human resource, we're talking about a business function, and we'll talk about how the function has to perform its activities such as the recruitment, selection, induction, together with placement, and then the salary determination processes, together with the fringe benefits and the implication of some of the impact or some of the legislations. So we'll be looking into your human resource for our next lesson. So hoping this lesson was making sense and hoping to see you watch this lesson again. So with that being said, thank you for watching. See you next time.